Matthew Tkachuk had his day with the Cup on Thursday, and what better way to wake up than beside the Cup? He stopped by his old elementary school in St. Louis, surprised some of the students. And then later on Thursday, Tkachuk visited a children's hospital where he let some of the kids have their moment with the Stanley Cup.
When I found out the support for myself during the Stanley Cup and during the playoffs, with the Blues being out and kind of everybody from St. Louis kind of jumping on and supporting me and my team, that meant so much to me. And I've dreamt of this day like my entire life, being able to bring the Cup back to St. Louis, celebrating it with everybody that's got me to where I am right now. So this has been an incredible, incredible time and something that I'll remember forever.
Joined one final time for this season by our hockey analyst, Frankie Corrado. It's Coach Questions, the Western edition. And Frankie, this is the last time we'll talk to you until September. The rosters of most of the NHL teams are pretty much set. So what I'm going to ask you to do is make yourself each of these teams' head coach, and I'm going to ask you the biggest question on the minds of all these Canadian head coaches right now. We're going to start with the Edmonton Oilers. They had Victor Arvidsson. They add Jeff Skinner to an already impressive forward group. They pretty much run back all the players that took them to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. If you're Kris Knoblauch, Frankie, what are you thinking when you look at this roster?
So I think I see, a very explosive offense, Jay, and I can account on this team scoring a lot of goals. And they improved a lot defensively, and Stuart Skinner played well at times. But I guess the biggest question I want to ask is there going to be a big discrepancy between how good my team is offensively and what I get from my decor and my goaltending? Like, this team is going to be potent. You're going to be led by McDavid and Draisaitl. Like, you're going to have a lot to give there offensively. But as a decor, can they take another step? The goaltending, Stuart Skinner, can he be really consistent? Like, when we see him play really well, can he do that more often? And if that's the case, you don't have such a discrepancy between how good you are defensively and maybe what there might not be defensively. And, let's be fair. The team improved a lot defensively as the season went on last year when Knoblauch took over. But maybe making sure there's less of a discrepancy between the forwards and the D and the goalie would probably be the biggest question for Kris Knoblauch.
As for the Vancouver Canucks, they lose Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov to their hated rivals, the Boston Bruins. Though they do steal away Jake DeBrusk from the Boston Bruins, they add some depth. They re-sign Filip Hronek. What's the biggest question for Rick Tocchet as he looks at his roster?
Can Elias Pettersson play like a superstar? Can he play like a player who gets paid $11.6 million? And it's funny right now, if you look at the Canucks roster, you see Pettersson down the middle, you see Miller down the middle. And if you're thinking who's number one, who's number two, you can basically flip a coin right now. The salary would tell you that Pettersson is the number one center. But with the way that things went last year, JT Miller was that number one guy. If the Canucks want to be competitive in the Pacific, and I mean that with the Edmonton Oilers, you're going to be going head-to-head against Connor McDavid. And that means Elias Pettersson has a lot of responsibility to be close to that 95, 100-point range and bear that load. And that'll be a question for Rick Tocchet as far as how can Pettersson get his game to that level, keep it at that level, and especially keep it at that level come playoffs time, because that's when they're going to need him to be at playing at that $11.6 million level the most.
Well, and that was going to be my follow-up to you, Frankie. Watching Pettersson in the playoffs last year, at any point did you say to yourself, is this just a terrific regular season player and maybe someone who isn't built for the playoffs necessarily?
No, I don't think that, Jay. I think that, when we've seen Pettersson struggle in the past, and we don't know this for sure, but you hear rumblings. There could be the wrist issue, or it could be, something that's lingering with his skating. And, it feels like when those questions seem to arise, his play tapers off quite a bit. And, those things are going to happen to every player. They happen to the best players in the world. But, there's some guys that are able to get through that and play through that and not let it affect them as much. So for Pettersson, I think it becomes a little bit of a question of, you're not always going to feel 100%, but you still have to find a way to produce and play at the level that they pay you and expect you to. And he's, call it for what he is. He's a very unique talent. He's not the fastest player, but man, is he shifty. He's got a great shot. He's got great hands. When he's playing with confidence, there's not a lot of players that can play the way that he plays, but he's going to have that confidence more often than not, and I'm sure Rick Tocchet is banking on him having that confidence this year.
The Winnipeg Jets had a very quiet offseason, as you know, Frankie. Sean Monahan leaves for Columbus. At the same time, Scott Arniel takes over. And Scott Arniel was terrific, taking over for Rick Bowness when Bowness had to leave the bench a couple times to be with his wife this past season. So Scott Arniel's already familiar with the roster, but with not a lot of changes, what is Arniel thinking right now?
How can we find a little more offense for this team, Jay? One of the best defensive teams in the NHL last year. You take a look at goals against and goals against per game. They're right there near the top of the list with the Florida Panthers. Like their issue is not defensively. Now, offensively, they're a middle of the pack team. And if they can find a little more this year, like maybe Cole Perfetti getting an expanded role helps find a little more offense. Maybe Gabriel Velarde being healthy for a full 82 games or close to 82 games finds a little more offense. And maybe Nick Ehlers can take himself from a 25-goal guy to a 30-plus goal guy and, a 60-point guy into that 70-point, 75-point range. All those things are very attainable for those three players and for the group. So for the Winnipeg Jets, it's more about keeping the defensive structure that they had in place, which I don't think will be an issue for them, but it's finding a little more offense, and that'll help facilitate things for the Jets this season.
The Perfetti question, Frankie, is so polarizing for Jets fans because you get this player who is so highly touted coming out of junior. He falls to you at number 10. It hasn't quite worked out the way the Jets or Perfetti probably have wanted, but I think from the fan base's perspective, Frankie, there's a perception that he hasn't been given the opportunities that other players in his draft class have been given. Would you agree with that? And do you feel like this year could be a breakout year for a player like that?
Yeah, Jay, it does feel like at times Cole Perfetti, hasn't been trusted. Like that's the word I'll use. He's had opportunities at times. But, the way you probably want to approach things now is eliminate all the excuses. Like just say, we're going to give you every opportunity now. And he deserves every opportunity. He was drafted in a time in the first round where, those are players that generally get a lot of opportunities. He has a great track record in junior hockey and he's shown a lot of signs at the NHL that he can be very productive. So I think for the Jets, it's about eliminating any excuse as far as not having the opportunity, getting him in a position to succeed with some good players and seeing what he can do. Because what's the worst that can happen? Either it doesn't work and you have your answer, or it does work and now you hit on a guy who's a top 10 pick who can give you a lot of offense. Like I kind of see the Cole Perfetti situation as a win-win situation for the Jets. So he can provide more offense for that team. And I would expect them to put him in a situation where he can provide that.
For the longest time, Frankie, the Calgary Flames did not like to use the word rebuild. And, that trickled down from their owner, Murray Edwards, who didn't like that word. But here we are. They seem to be embracing it now. Craig Conroy has basically stripped that roster right down. Nazem Kadri's still there, but that might not be the case at some point this season. Ryan Huska, how do you think he should feel about this rebuilding roster as we head into next season?
I think the biggest question for him would be, what are we going to be as a team? Because there's still some good players on that roster, some veteran guys, and Nazem Kadri is one of those guys. Jonathan Huberdeau remains a big question mark as far as, what kind of point total, what kind of production he can reach. And on the back end, you still have Mackenzie Weegar. You still have Rasmus Andersson. Like, you have some good players there. So you're probably not going to be bad enough that it is a scorched earth kind of rebuild. But it was, maybe a little bit of a retool. But how close does that get you to the playoffs? So I think for Calgary, they'll go into training camp. They'll start the regular season. And the evaluation period for that team is going to be a constant thing that's ongoing. And the success or lack of success is going to tell that group, Huska and the management staff and Craig Conroy, what the best course of action moving forward is. I think for Huska, you're probably thinking, what exactly are we? And that remains to be seen as the season gets going.